Welcome to LaunchPod, a product management podcast from LogRocket. Today, our guest is Alo Mukerji, VP of Product at WaveHQ, which develops money management software for small business owners. Driven by a genuine love for small and mid-sized businesses, Alo has worked in product leadership roles at Constant Contact, Buildium, acquired by RealPage, Toast, and Privy, acquired by Attentive. Alo's specialties include creating frictionless product experiences and increasing revenue through pricing models and new product lines. On today's episode, LogRocket's VP of Marketing, Jeff Wharton, talks to Alo about driving innovations at a fintech company, focusing on SMBs and the importance of rapid innovation. So here it is, our conversation with Alo Mukerji.
Hey, Alo. So excited to have you on today. We've known each other for, I feel like, quite a while, but this is the first time we actually get to really sit down and talk through product. I'm excited to have you on.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, definitely. No, this is fun. I'm really stoked for this episode. You've done a lot of really cool stuff in the SMB world and looking forward to dig into it. First, I'd like to kind of just start with the obvious. PM was not something that was big. Product was not a huge, it's not something you and I could have majored in college when we started, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't what it is now 20, plus years ago when we all started. How did you end up in product, and what did that career path look like that took you to senior leadership and running product for some of the companies you've been at?
I don't know if my story is unique or not, but it certainly is somewhat interesting, or an interesting path. I was a consultant when I came out of college. I worked for Accenture for a while. And I think around the time I left Accenture, and I was a project manager in the tech world, but that's when all the internet bubble happened. Maybe I'm aging myself a little bit. Everything was going crazy. People were going to work for these really interesting and new companies. And so that's how I ended up in product. I saw this junior product management position at a tech startup, and it was maybe the only one I was qualified for. So I ended up applying there, and that was a great company. And so I was very lucky to get that job. And then I ended up sharing an office with their more senior product people. And so really got a very good sense of what that role was. And I loved the fact that there were salespeople coming in all the time. They were on customer calls. I mean, they were really at the center of the universe in terms of like people just coming in and the questions that were being asked and the set of activities. And so that gave me a really interesting view into what product was about. And I was like, yeah, that's what I want. I'm not doing the legwork here, but ultimately I had decided pretty early on that seemed like a cool job. That company was called eRoom Technology, and there was a bunch of Lotus people there. And the CEO of that company, Jeffrey Beers, just a great person, also had a product background. And product was at the center of that, even though it started as an enterprise company, went into SaaS. And so I got a very good sense there for what it meant and really wanted to be a part of that. So I was sold pretty early on.
There you go. I do feel like consulting can be a great path into it, right? Because it's all about how do you understand an ecosystem, maybe one that you're a little bit new to? How do you understand the levers and the pillars there, and then affect change and drive that forward? And if you look at a company as a product, it's kind of a similar thing. So yeah, I think that transition makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and really just like, how do you frame a problem? How do you present a problem? And so, yes, it was a great introduction to what it eventually became.
I feel like it's the same way you see a lot of history majors go into sales, is they're great at reading a lot, assimilating a lot of information, and making a thesis statement. I feel like I've seen an overabundance of sales leaders who are history majors. Similarly, consultants have a good path into product.
So interesting. And I've also, even in my career, to kind of answer the second part of your question, I've also oscillated between having these product leadership roles and doing some consulting stints in between, because it's just another way to get to know a customer, getting to know a space, providing some solutions on the product innovation side. So yes, there's a lot of similarities.
So we can fast forward a few years and you find yourself at Wave. So we're flying through career at this point, landing the last couple of years. You're at Wave, a fantastic SMB fintech company. And specifically, if we want to focus on maybe the last year, you all have just been ripping through product releases, it seems. Just in the past 12 months alone, what is it? A new mobile app, a whole new product around mobile receipts, a new nav, I think I just saw recently. I guess I'd love to understand, especially the most recent one, I saw a lot of the team talking about data-driven design, the level of kind of research that went into doing that. What fueled this bout of innovation, and what is this kind of idea of data-driven design that you guys were leveraging? What goes into that?
Actually, as a company, we do service the service-based SMB market, and we do offer a lot of products. And so there is a lot of space for innovation, which is really nice. What drove the first one you mentioned, the mobile app, for example, is we were trying to unify these experiences because in fintech, I think that's where a lot of the power is, regardless of what different products you're offering. It's the unification that really provides that. And so that's what we're trying to do at a very high level. And then we also very recently, we were just a free product for a long time, and now we put out some paid tiers as well. So all of this was in preparation of some of the things we want to do in the future in terms of paid offerings as well. And so we do utilize research. This is common, I think, with the SMB market, and especially with B2B SaaS, which is where I've been for a long time, really leaning into understanding customer value. Like, where do people put value? And that to me is the name of the game with research, whether it's pricing or packaging or product innovation, whatever it might be. And so I guess the types of research that we've done and the things that we've looked into, particularly because I think simplicity, good design, good UI, UX has always been one of our, I think, differentiators. Again, has to be in the SMB market and in the B2B SaaS self-service space. I guess traditionally these things are very hard to quantify, whether it's customer experience or just the results of UI and UX design. And it's been nice because with some of these projects, particularly I think the navigation one that you mentioned, we did have a little bit of luxury when it came to time to just be able to do some discovery work to figure out both testing some ideas. And then ultimately when we launched it, we had a before and after, real quantification and measurement around anything really. UI, UX is often a luxury. And luckily nowadays, there's a lot of tools out there, including your own, that help people with that. So it's become easier over time. But anytime you see quantification tracking, that's always a big help in terms of helping us really figure out what kind of differences we're making in terms of value with these customers.
I read a lot of LinkedIn over the past little bit of time. I saw one bit where one of your team actually posted a blog post, I think it was from the design team, how they actually went through and understood what users needed and how they navigated the nav specifically, I think the new nav. And there's some interesting bits about, he talked through, they had people unprompted describe the different functions your product did and in their own words, group them into functionality. And, goal there was to make sure that how you grouped them in the nav matched with how people thought about them in their unprompted world. Was there anything else like that? Was there more to it than that for this kind of idea of user research here?
That's a really good example. You're doing more broader research to understand some of those things. And then when you've got some ideas, you're doing more validation pieces to it. And then ultimately, when you launch, you've actually got the real data to compare and contrast. That's one example. But that kind of flow I mentioned, we could say we use the same one even when we were doing pricing research as an example. So we're going out there trying to figure out where are people putting value at a very high level, bringing that down, having them make some decisions and some trade-offs, ideating on that, and then validating some ideas, and then ultimately looking at data. And if you need to adjust after it gets into market. So I think that's a pretty good way we approach that process.
I had mentioned all the kind of things you guys have released over the past year, but I missed apparently new pricing that had launched recently, and you went from free to more paid. How were you monetizing before, and what was the impetus to moving to paid? And I guess, what were the risks that you guys saw with that? Because it's always kind of a little bit of a risk to move to something where you're asking people for money. How are they going to stick on?
Absolutely. So Wave has actually been around for a long time, and we always had a free invoicing and accounting product, and we monetized basically on payments. And that's been going on for years. We were acquired by H&R Block in 2019. And so as the product person, one of the issues with free is that it actually doesn't allow you to invest as much as you'd like in the customer problems and the customer needs. And for us, we've got a lot of folks that are coming in doing invoicing, and then they're monetizing on the payment side. So the invoicing, which is the thing that they really want to do, we haven't been able to innovate and make enough progress on the product side as we'd like, or solve as much of many of the customer problems that we'd like. Mm-hmm. So interestingly, I actually think having these more paid offerings is going to allow us to address those customer needs even better than we did before. And of course, it helps us also set ourselves up to be a much more scalable company in the future. And so that was some of the impetus. But the interesting thing about it is we have always been a free product. We're going to continue to be a free product. We just very smart about adding some paid offerings as well with additional value. And that's how we went to market. And that, as I mentioned before, we did a lot of prep work and a lot of testing and a lot of research around that to figure out how to do it. And then we did some risk mitigation exercises as well, as you always do with pricing. And then it's been in the market a couple of months now. It's been very successful.
Nice. I guess that's the way to add pricing, go from free to paid, is if you can. I've seen companies go, okay, now we're going to start charging for the thing that you were getting for free. And there's always user pushback, right? When I went to business school decades ago, there was the famous turkey case study around Thanksgiving where you gave the turkey away around Thanksgiving, and people start to just expect it.
Yeah.
So you give it away free for too long. It's really hard to unfree that thing, but to take that loyal audience and say, hey, we're going to innovate on these things you want more around, but you got to pay for it. One of the things I love is uncovering in this areas where it seems like doing the less customer-friendly thing potentially is more customer-friendly. We were talking with a guy named Sai who worked in the insurance industry, and he actually talked about all the insurance regulation and all the rules and stuff like that actually force insurance companies to be more customer-centric. And I love this kind of thing where by charging customers and asking them for money, you're actually able to be far more customer-centric and give them much more value. So I always love those little things you find.
Yeah. I've been working on pricing for a long time, and it always amazes me how, even with, I think, more straightforward things like price increases, for example, at the end of the day, if you make it about the value that you're providing, it really does benefit both parties. And even, at Wave with this change, customers do recognize that. They do actually recognize that.
I feel like we've talked a good bit about research, specifically UX research and user research. I'd like to keep on this topic, but mildly pivot to something that I always love, which is the concept of basic research. And I loved when I read this from you. We had you on our Spotlight series a while back, and you made this statement basically about investing in research is really important, and basic research is really important. And I have so many anecdotes about interesting things we've found that have actually been giant scale metrics when we've done that, or scale levers rather, when we've done that. But for you and your career, maybe what has that led to at Wave or other companies where you've been doing this research and it's turned into something maybe you didn't expect or have turned into high value offerings?
Maybe if I flip that around to say, use the word research or really mean more kind of customer-centric product development, that being an important part of your product development process, I think it goes back to the value. Like, you're constantly trying to find research is a mechanism for just figuring out where people put the value. And I think it's been incredibly important, again, in B2B SaaS and SMB, because there's so much that you can't pick up on in just asking somebody what do they need or what do they want. Mm-hmm. I used to work at Toast, which is in the restaurant industry. That's a really great example. Like, you can't possibly understand what is happening until you're like there. You're like, not only does this have to be like easy to use, like they've got to be able to do this in the middle of 5 different other things going on. Or I did a lot of actually research in the fintech area on just how people finance their small businesses and things like that. And there's so many things you pick up on in the entire customer journey that you would have missed had you not looked hard enough. And so I think getting those answers and really digging in helps you come up ultimately with a better solution that fits the actual needs, which is, I think, as product people, that's our job, is really to understand the real meaning behind it and then translate that into something in technology. That's really why I'm a big believer in it, because you can't just ask simple questions like, what do you want? And necessarily pick up on all that nuance, which is where the magic kind of is.
So, it's pretty easy to go out to a customer or prospects and say, hey, what do you need? What product should we build? And they'll give you an answer. I think the famous tech story is Apple coming back and inventing the mouse and saying the users wanted a better command line. And in reality, what the market really wanted in the end was just a better interface and a way to do that. How do you go about arriving at those insights? When you're at Toast, I assume you didn't just go into restaurants and watch them work for a day or two. Maybe you did. I don't That'd be awesome, actually. But
yeah, we did that too. But I think it's more about, you have to be a little bit skilled to do it, but asking the questions around the questions. Yes, you can ask what you need or what you want, but then figuring out like why that is, and then what is the whole set of tasks that are happening, and where can you find the nuggets of information in that. So I think back to what we were talking about maybe in the beginning, like going a little bit broad broad, understanding a little bit more, and then digging in deeper where you need to dig in deeper. I think I talked in that spotlight too about like doing a little bit of qualitative work and then figuring out where you want to go deeper and then getting in there with the data or validating with the data, et cetera. I think it's just about going broader than you might think and having the skills to ask the right questions in those areas.
I was definitely picturing you and your team at Toast, like scurrying around a coffee shop or something.
We did do that too.
Yeah.
We did do that too. That's a great story, actually. One of the things, I think COVID helped with this a lot, but one of the things that you wouldn't have picked up on is how hard it was for these people just to get their internet working at the time. Yeah. At that time, not everybody had that outdoor seating, and something like that, you're like, oh, that's actually their biggest problem. That makes me rethink the whole thing. And so that's just a really good example.
Yeah, always, ask the right questions. And then you can never beat at some level spending some time with the customer, just watching them operate, watching them work. I can't remember who I was talking to. It was a colleague of mine from years ago. They had launched a new app to basically run payroll. And what they found is people were using about half of it and getting to a certain point and then coming back in later and trying to figure out what was going on. And so finally, he just went out to a few customers and sat with them and realized that they were literally stopping partway through, opening a spreadsheet, doing all these calculations by hand, and then coming back in and manually entering these numbers that the application did. And they thought they had made it very clear that it could do that. But in the end, they realized they had not communicated that value well enough. And so they found that all these people were just having this terrible experience. It was just a matter of exposing that product capability better. So I think you always learn the interesting little nits when you do that.
Yeah, back to what you asked me in the beginning, I think it's all about just being curious around those problems. That's really what we're trying to do.
Yeah. And to that curiosity, I always love a good rule. Anyone who has a framework or a rule, I eat that stuff up. I love it. I've heard you talk about this rule of 5 for user feedback. And it made sense to me, but can you maybe explain a little bit and how it works out?
Yeah. So we've talked about this process, but that idea of going broad, to me, 5 is like a good manageable number, particularly I would say 5 in each segment of whatever your audience segments might be. But just talking to 5 people to just get a sense of like, where do I want to go with this? Like, where are the areas that I want to go deeper? Do I need more qualitative? Do I need more quantitative? Is there a way for me to get this data? I think you get so much, 80 to 90% of what you need to get just talking to those 5 people. And then again, like the magic comes when you're looking in between and figuring out where do you dive deeper and how do you even design the right study that you want to design around the research. So I've just found 5 to be a pretty good number where you get all the information that you need in order to dive deeper.
It's good to have an idea around that because it's very easy to either say, hey, we talked to a couple people, we got the info, or at what point do you stop? You could go on forever talking to customers. And the second you get one different answer, you go, oh, maybe we're thinking about this all wrong. So it's good to have that kind of rough idea of at what point, we're big here on how do you test a core hypotheses? How do you gather the data you need to get to the point of conviction and then move to the next thing? And you iterative testing through an entire process to complete a project or come to a final thesis. And one thing we've always gone back and forth on is what's proof? What is convictable proof versus just anecdotal? So I always love to hear how other people look at that and where they set the bar, because I think it can inform a lot of what we do here. And hopefully people listening, it can also help there.
Yeah. And maybe to summarize it, I would just say to your point, the 5 gets me to the themes that I need to get to. And then I can decide what I want to do from there.
That's fair.
Yeah.
So we talked very briefly about pricing and packaging a few seconds ago, but I told you before we started recording, I think one of my nerdy passions is pricing and packaging because it's maybe an underloved lever in my mind.
Yes.
You can have the best product, you can have the best messaging, but if your pricing is off, your packaging just doesn't make sense, you'll probably do okay, but I would wager you are leaving huge amounts of value on the table. And it seems like you've gone through a lot of that recently, so I'd love to pick your brain a little bit about it, to be honest. And first of all, I'm going to put you on the spot on this, but you talked briefly about a point in your career. There was one time where you only talked to customers and not to people outside the org, but you were looking to grow the new customer number and use that data to set some pricing and packaging policy, and it didn't work. But that's where the story ended. Can we know the story?
Yeah, that was that's going back. But yes, that was the first time I would say both new product and pricing and packaging work. So luckily I haven't repeated those mistakes again. That's exactly what happened. We only researched with our own customer base, partly because that's easier to do. You have access to them. And that was one of our goals. But now I always look at those two are definite segments. You look at your new customers versus like your current customers and try to figure something out that works for both of them. But in that case, I hadn't done that. And so when we launched it, it wasn't doing so well with just bringing people into the product suite, which was one of our goals. And so we actually pretty quickly gathered that data and then had to make some changes to how we did the pricing. And luckily, it wasn't so far off. There were some tweaks that we had to do, but we were able to make those adjustments and it worked out a lot better. It just wasn't being priced on something that those folks understood, whereas it worked a little bit better with our current customer base. But yeah, we ultimately came up with something that accommodated both.
And how did you discover the right pricing lever there? Was it just talking to those prospects or how'd you get there?
I think in that case, because our conversion numbers weren't what we wanted them to be, we just went out and talked to some of the folks. And then we did some of the other things I talked. We just were watching people and we're asking them, like, what are your questions? You're looking at this pricing page. What are your questions? And so we were able to actually pretty quickly, even within 5, right, figure out something's going on here where this is not making sense to them.
Right.
And that actually made sense because it was what our current customers were pricing off of. So obviously they understood it and these guys didn't. And it was really important for them to have predictability in pricing as it is for most customers, but certainly for SMBs, they wanted to be able to predict what their monthly cost would be. So went back and figured out how to work that in a way that would make sense for everybody.
I love that you slipped the rule of 5 reference in there.
Yeah.
But it's true, right? If you get 5 people in a row who all say the same thing, and it's person 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5,
right,
all have basically the same point, well, you're probably onto something. We had a similar problem, I think. We have a big blog for product managers. And when we launched that, some metrics were going right and some things were not hitting what we wanted from a results standpoint. And I think one thing people underestimate is how willing people are to just answer questions if you're just coming at them from an honest point of view. Hey, we just want to see this work.
Right.
I'm not going to sell to you. I just want to ask you some questions about this. And we were able to get a lot of people to respond to us and chat with us. And the first 5 all said the exact same thing. I was working with one other member of my team and we were laughing, like, almost did these people coordinate? Because it's just so identical. And that's when you know, I think we're on to something here. And we were able to pivot. And that's actually what led to this podcast that we're doing right now.
I love your blog. So it's working, whatever it was.
Yeah. Oh, good. That's be right. 5 people. And we kept going, but we should have been smart. We should have stopped after 5 because we talked to a ton more people, but it just was the same thing. So I'm gonna definitely use that in the future. Now, same topic, but a more positive one. Buildium, you went through a similar exercise, but rather than have kind of problems and have to go back and retool and refix, it worked really well. And you guys came out with a lot of success. So can you maybe go through, like, what were you building and what did you do differently there that allowed you to hit it out of the park on the first run?
Yeah, that was a very interesting situation where we, again, focused on the SMB side of the market, really small property managers. We're talking like 10 units or less. And there was a real desire to go slightly up market to monetize those customers better. And whether it was myself or there are a lot of people at the company that are very passionate about the small business market, and they tend to not like these bundled solutions. They tend to not want to pay for things that they don't have to pay for. And trying to hold fast to a pricing model that worked both for them and the up market was a challenge. And I think we had to be pretty innovative about what we came up with, which was to give them some a la carte options, but then also to price these bundles really well where they had the opportunity to upgrade. And that ultimately was very successful because it was also a great multi-product strategy and also helped us with retention and various things. But a couple of the things that we did right there, I felt like one kind of internal and one external is that we actually looked at every single customer. Like we really looked at it on a spreadsheet and tried to predict how they would behave. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of like quant work that you do, but ultimately that paid off. Like we had a very good sense of what we thought was going to happen when we launched. And then the other thing I would say, I read about these like pricing councils and different things, but in my experience, and this goes back to, when I worked at Constant Contact or at Buildium, pricing, it's never going to be consensus driven. And you have to be very clear about who has the accountability and who's making the decisions. And one of the really nice things at Buildium was it was myself and our CEO and our CFO at the time. And just having having the leadership, like really having your back and really saying, this is what we're doing. Like we got all the data, but this is actually what we're doing, and having conviction around that. I think that's really important to just know who's accountable and what messaging you're putting out there, because there's so much variability. And I also always say that with pricing, you never really know what's going to happen until you launch it. You do all the research, you never really know. The market could have shifted in that time. And there's many, many things that can happen in between now and then. And so I think it's really important to have that conviction and kind of the risk mitigation stuff ready to go should things not go the way that you had planned.
Yeah. And those are the problems I love the most. Those are the problems where, and the decisions where you can really set a company apart. There are certain things that are maybe not totally binary, but there's a really clear, like a right answer and a wrong answer. Those are good to work through, but they're not that fun. At least, I don't know, maybe that's just me, but they're less fun because at some point you just know I'm right. And there's very little opinion involved. And I've said this before, I love an opinionated company or an opinionated decision at some point. There's a set of problems I feel like that companies hit where there's no wrong. There's definitely more right.
Yeah.
Ones where you kind of have the opportunity to really just leap bounds ahead of competition or to really progress a market. And I love those kinds of things. So it's great to hear. Pricing, I think, is one of those, right? Pricing and packaging, there's a lot of safe things to do, but you can also do some really neat things that can really set you apart and really set you up for success. If you just do what you said, like align leadership, work to gather the necessary data, but then also push of this is what we're doing. And now that we've got the information, we're going to make it the decision, we're going to push this forward. But like you said, still have the mitigation efforts because sometimes opinions are wrong. So it's good to have the bailout door.
I think that's a lot of product too, as well. You're trying to make these decisions. You're trying to make these decisions on a day-to-day basis, and all research and data and all these other things help you do is just get the probabilities up, right? It's just a matter of getting the probabilities up. But ultimately, we have to make calls as product people, whether it's pricing or whether am I going to launch this or how you prioritize things or whatever it might be.
Maybe just the marketer, maybe I love the big leaps forward. So I love the giant statement movements that disrupt a market. Cool. I think, interestingly, we were able to just cover a place that went really well, a place that maybe didn't go as well. And it's interesting. I was listening to 20-Minute VC this morning walking to work. I listen to far too many podcasts. I walk to work, I walk home from work, I listen to him in the gym. So I listened to a lot of these, and it was interesting. He had Sam Altman and some of the team from OpenAI on. And one thing that they talked about was actually their feel was you learn more from big successes than anything else. Everyone says that you learn from failure, but they didn't agree with that. And I'm curious to get your take on, especially having gone through just maybe not a failure, but something that didn't go as well as you would have hoped, and then a big success. Where do you think you learn more? Where have you learned more?
Yeah, I think I've been so lucky in my career that I've worked for some incredible companies and some incredible leaders along the way. And pretty early on, like those companies were very successful. And I was lucky enough to be there during the ride. I would agree that there was a ton to learn from the model of what works and what good leadership looks like, and how do you get successful in SaaS, for example. I mean, I worked for Constant Contact. They wrote the book on that. And I feel like I definitely learned a lot from the role modeling and just seeing what was going on in some of those places. And of course, like the failures, you learn a ton from that too. It's just different. Like I think from the successes, you're learning what you want to do and repeat. And from the failures, you're just trying to figure out what could I have done better? How can I learn more about this area, et cetera? So I think they're both important. I'm going
to play politician on this one.
Yeah.
I was thinking a lot about that this morning, so that hence me bringing it up. But I had an opinion already going into this question with you. I'm going to play politician. And I think the places I've honestly learned the most are where we've initially made mistakes and where something has not gone right and we've been able to turn it around. Because sometimes the things that go right just because maybe you have just such overwhelming, massive product market fit that you could do almost anything and you're going to win.
Yeah.
You can get a lot of false positives. Similarly, in a bad market or a wrong product market fit, maybe you're doing the right stuff and just your product isn't that great, or it's great, but just not for the market. But it's the places where you realize you were doing something wrong in a world you could have succeeded and you found out what that was. Because oftentimes, like, the difference between something that's going quite wrong and going insanely well, often you're not off by exponential amounts. You're off by just a little bit of the most important lever, and you tweak that until you find yourself up into the right versus flat. And I think those are the places I've loved and feel like I've learned the most, because then you see, oh, this is how that works. This is the why, or this is the what that I missed. Now I can apply that later potentially.
Yeah, I guess I would say play politician on my end a little bit. Actually, going back to the research a little bit, to me, what's the most fun is just trying to figure out those problems. What is it? And then how do I actually get into how do I solve it? And doing that with a great team of people, which is what some of these successful companies are. To me, that's the most fun process, regardless of whether it actually succeeded or failed. It's the process of figuring it out.
Yeah, I was going to say totally leave this subject now and completely move on. I think the problem with that is what we're going to jump into is tied. So let's minorly move on. And you've talked a lot about, especially in SMB, that velocity. Velocity in product is really important. And this is why I realized we're only moving on because success and failure is such an important thing here. In reality, it's probably a matter of you get more successes if you just move faster. You can get more success under your wing and maybe just can hopefully have one that massively outperforms and erases all your losses. You can mitigate your losses and really invest in your wins. But I guess what's so important about velocity in product on the SMB side, especially? What drives you to push so hard to move quickly here?
I think a lot of it is just software in general. The market moves so fast. And let's be honest, in software, anyone can copy anything, right? It's just a matter of building stuff. And so I think it's really critical to be able to get out into market, get to an audience quickly thing and try to test and iterate on top of that. And then with SMBs and consumers too, because I think they behave very similarly, it's always really important to try to be the first. Usually, these people don't want to be out there looking for software. Think of that restaurant person I just talked about, right? There's no way. And I think the faster you can get to them in their journey, they're probably going to stay embedded with you as long as you're not doing anything too wrong. I think being the first in their tech stack or whatever part of their tech stack they're trying to figure out is super, super important. For those reasons, I think velocity is important. And then as a product person, you just want to learn. So the faster you get out there, the more data you have. Again, back to what we were talking about before, you never really know what's going to happen. So might as well get out there fast, learn from that, and then adjust accordingly. So I think particularly in software and B2B SaaS, where you can make adjustments and you can make changes, time to market is just critical. I think it's just critical.
Yeah. Like you said, you get one chance to be the first one to the market, but also I think you get one chance in a lot of these markets for these people to be introduced to you. And they will stay with you if you present the right solution and something that works well. But the contrary to that is if they're underwhelmed by what you deliver, they might never come back. So how do you balance this speed and velocity with delivering a complete solution that's at least complete enough for what they need? Last week, we went over this idea of the concept of the MVP is dying because it's not great for anybody. But how do you deliver this minimum complete product, but still maintain velocity?
Yeah. So I would go back to the word value, right? You're really trying to figure out how much value can you deliver in order to get some learnings or whatever your objectives might be. And that is where the data and the research comes in handy. And I really have an issue when people think that takes a long time, because today, with all the tools that we have in place, the different ways you can do the research, you actually can get through it pretty fast if you want to. If you really put the time and effort into it, you can do it pretty fast to at least where you have some confidence in what you're putting out. Again, you don't know everything, but you can be pretty sure that you aren't delivering whatever type of value you want to be delivering. How is that going to resonate? So I use the research and the data piece of it to get some confidence on that spectrum, what it is that I'm putting out there. And is it actually achieving whatever the goal might be with that particular product?
Yeah, I think it's been important. So here, obviously, I don't work in product here, and we sell a lot, and I talk to customers all the time, and I have the benefit of being able at least to talk to our head of product and our head of engineering quite a lot. And I have an opinion whether they like it or not. But one thing that's been important, we've been working over the past year to launch and really increase the basic way to understand severity of user issues and kind of take this world of analytics where it's very retrospective. It's very, you react to things going on. How do we make that proactive? And part of that is how do we surface the things you need to look at as fast as possible, not after it's hurt your KPIs or after users complain. When it's just happened to a few people, how do we surface it to you right away so you're not looking for the next thing you need to understand? And the big thing we keyed in on here, I think this is the important thing, the velocity rate, is understand what's the vital things that you cannot miss on and make sure you deliver those. And that gets you a long way. So here it was, we do not want to have false positives. The second you have even a couple false positives, people start to look at it and go, this AI thing is just like everything else. It's garbage.
Right.
So we worked really hard to make sure that that level of false positive was near zero. And the rest we can iterate on and continue to improve. But that's the part we had to lock in. I think that's worked really well for us to put my 2 cents on this topic was velocity can be driven really quickly, but you have to understand what are the no mistake areas, or, in hiking, or skiing, you call them the no fall zones.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I love that example, because I think going after the data that you do have is often one of the faster paths to understanding whatever it is that you're trying to understand. So it's a very good example of why there's just so much stuff there to look at from a speed perspective before you have to go out into a market or whatever research you want to do.
Now, last topic, I want to make sure we cover it because I find it super interesting, and I love seeing that you've been really involved here. But there's this group, Fintech is Fem. I've seen you talk about speaking with them and participating in events. And you come up on my LinkedIn a lot, I'm going to be honest. Which is great. I think I learned a lot, actually. I'll be honest. It's been really helpful. I feel like I see a lot and learn a lot here. You got a lot of good wisdom. But I've seen this a lot, and I'm curious, what's your level of involvement here? What is the group? I can guess from the name, maybe a little bit more detail would be awesome.
Yeah, we just did, I think they had their inaugural event in New York where I was on this panel. And I will say that was a truly transformational experience. And I don't know that I was necessarily expecting that. Nicole Casperson, she put that on, truly inspirational leader in terms of just recognizing, I think, what I felt in the room, which is that there are these traditional fintech businesses, insurance, bank, these long time businesses, and just having the space to hear the female voices in the room and recognize that you're experiencing the same things. That was really quite powerful, actually. And I don't know if I knew that going into it. I'm always skeptical of the values of a lot of these conferences, but boy, that was a really great event. Even AI, we were talking about AI, and instead of being usually this huge, what our jobs are taking away and whatever, we really got down to the tactics of what can we do in our day-to-day with AI and product, particularly in product inclusion. So I'm a huge fan. I mean, I'm newer to it, but I hope to do more. I think Nicole's done an amazing job.
Awesome. They're on LinkedIn, it looks like, a whole bunch of other places. Definitely worth checking out. And then as you think on AI, I think you and I will have to reconnect. I'd love to hear tactically. I think that's the big struggle is everyone has these big grandiose ideas, but tactics are what are you doing today with it is, I think, something often missing.
Right.
Maybe we'll have to do an episode 2 a while out after we both push some product out and see what works. As a last thought, if people want to follow up, if people want to ask you questions or get in touch with you, is there a way people should look for you?
LinkedIn is always a good one. And then I'm sure there'll be links to this and I did the Spotlight series with you guys. But yes, LinkedIn is always a really good place, to start. And I do check it. So would love to hear from anyone that cares about these topics.
Awesome. Alo, thank you so much for joining us. As always, a pleasure to chat, and we'll have to do this again sometime.
Yeah, it's great to see you. Thanks so much.